Dr. Naira Hassan stared at the holographic display floating before her, fighting to keep her expression neutral as Dr. Vexthor's scaled face filled the screen. The alien xenobiologist's membrane-covered eyes pulsed with what she had learned to recognize as smugness. As you can see from the latest data, Vexthor gestured with one of his auxiliary limbs, humans require an unconscious recovery state for nearly one-third of their planetary rotation. Simply remarkable that any species could evolve with such an obvious vulnerability. Soft clicks and whistles of amusement rippled through the gathered alien scientists at the Galactic Science Institute's annual conference. Naira kept her hands relaxed in her lap, though they itched to curl into fists. Most fascinating, chirped Dr. Lirith, her bioluminescent appendages flashing in what passed for scholarly interest among her kind. And they remain completely defenseless during these sleep periods? Oh, absolutely. Vexthor's secondary breathing sac inflated with excitement. They can't even maintain basic thermal homeostasis without artificial coverings. They wrap themselves in processed fiber products, blankets, they call them. Rather touching, in a primitive sort of way. The massive display shifted to show various human habitats. Naira recognized her own quarters among them, though the footage must have been months old. She'd rearranged her workspace since then. She wondered if anyone else noticed how the camera angles carefully avoided her private research station. Note their obsession with controlling their immediate environment, Vexthor continued, indicating a typical human dwelling. They can only survive in a laughably narrow temperature range. Too hot, they die. Too cold, they die. Too much atmospheric pressure, too little, death, death, death. He clicked his mandibles in what the rest of the chamber recognized as their species' equivalent of head shaking. Naira pulled up her own data pad, quietly adding notes to her private research files. 3 months of careful observation, documented with precision that would make her old professors proud. She'd learned early on that being underestimated had its advantages. But perhaps most concerning, Vexthor's tone dropped to what he probably thought was diplomatic discretion, is their psychological instability. Their neural chemistry is in constant flux. They can experience multiple, often contradictory emotional states within the same temporal unit. The slightest stimulus can trigger dramatic hormonal cascades. Surely you exaggerate, rumbled Council Member Thax, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. No sentient species could evolve with such volatility. I assure you, the data is quite accurate. Vexthor pulled up another chart. They even have a term for it, mood swings. Their entertainment media is absolutely saturated with references to these emotional fluctuations. They seem to consider it normal. The chamber erupted in various species' versions of laughter. Even the usually stoic gaseous collective pulsed with amused color patterns. Naira continued her notes, adding timestamps and cross-references. Her fingers moved with careful precision across the holographic interface, betraying none of the emotions Vexthor found so fascinating. 3 months of documentation, carefully cataloging every patronizing safety protocol, every simplified explanation, every well-meaning but insufferable attempt to protect her from her own supposed limitations. And yet, came a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, they've achieved faster-than-light travel. The laughter died away as Dr. Thalnine, the Institute's oldest member and resident expert on emerging civilizations, floated forward in her containment field. Her species had evolved past the need for physical forms eons ago, but protocol required at least a visible manifestation. They've split atoms, decoded their own genome, and developed quantum computing, Thalnine continued. All while requiring sleep, managing temperature variations, and experiencing these emotional states you find so amusing. Vexthor's scales flickered uncertainly. Well, yes, but dash. And they did it all in less than 10,000 years from their first written language. That's practically a galactic record. Surely you're not suggesting dash, Vexthor began. I am suggesting nothing, Thalnine interrupted. I am merely noting that perhaps our definitions of weakness and strength might benefit from broader perspective. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. On the main screen, Earth continued its slow rotation, utterly indifferent to the debate its inhabitants had sparked. "Well," Vexthor said brightly, his professional pomposity reasserting itself, moving on to Exhibit G48, their peculiar dependence on regular hydration. Nobody noticed when Naira quietly accessed her private research database and added a small but significant notation, Day 92, confirmation of systemic observational bias in standard xenobiological protocols. Preparing Phase 2 of independent study. She glanced at the data chip concealed within her standard issue environmental suit, the one containing her true findings about human capabilities. The one documenting exactly what she'd accomplished while her alien colleagues were so busy protecting her from herself. The Earth spun on its axis in the main display, its lights twinkling like stars. Its sleeping inhabitants remained unaware they were being judged by the galaxy's finest minds, and being found simultaneously wanting and worryingly capable. Naira allowed herself a small smile. Let them underestimate humanity. Soon enough, they'd learn what Dr. Thalnine already suspected, that sometimes, what looked like weakness was merely strength wearing a clever disguise. 3 weeks after the conference, Naira found herself in Research Station Helios, staring at yet another triple-sealed environmental suit. The station's safety officer, Zix Ri, hovered nearby, their crystalline form vibrating with concern. "Remember, Dr. Hassan, you must complete the full 30-minute decontamination sequence before entering the xenogenetics laboratory," Zix Ri chimed. "Your species' immune system is so endearingly basic." "Thank you, Zix Ri," Naira replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral while mentally adding several choice words about where they could stick their decontamination protocols. She glanced at her hidden data pad, tracking another suspicious energy fluctuation in the station's systems. The past few weeks had seen a series of minor malfunctions, nothing serious enough to trigger official investigations, but forming a pattern that made her researchers' instincts tingle. Environmental controls failing in specific laboratories, data corrupted in particular research streams, always affecting the most promising human-led projects. "Dr. Hassan?" A new voice warbled through the station's comm system. "Your morning nutritional supplements have been adjusted to better accommodate your limited digestive capabilities." Naira's hand brushed against the hidden pocket containing actual Earth food, properly seasoned and everything, as she thanked the station's nutritionist. They still hadn't figured out how she maintained her energy levels without their carefully calculated nutrient pastes. She planned to keep it that way. Suited up, triple-sealed because heaven forbid a human be exposed to alien air, Naira made her way to the main laboratory. The corridor's environmental systems automatically adjusted as she passed, creating what her handlers called a safe passage bubble for her delicate constitution. "Good morning, everyone," she said as she entered the lab. 5 different species of alien researchers turned to regard her with various expressions of what she'd learned to interpret as concerned affection, the kind usually reserved for a particularly precocious toddler. "Ah, Dr. Hassan," Dr. Vexthor himself extended his sensory appendages in greeting. He'd arrived at the station 2 days ago to oversee her research. "We were just discussing your species' fascinating circadian rhythm requirements. Did you achieve adequate unconsciousness during your designated rest period?" "I slept fine, thank you," Naira replied, moving to her workstation. A complex array of protective barriers automatically sprang up around her, standard protocol for protecting the primitive. She began her equipment calibration sequence, simultaneously running a covert scan of the station's security logs. Another energy spike in Section C, 4th one this month. All in areas housing critical research equipment. All following a suspiciously similar pattern to incidents reported at 3 other research stations before they experienced catastrophic accidents. The first alert flashed across her private display, unauthorized access detected in the specimen storage area. Then another, environmental controls failing in Laboratory 7. And another, communications array showing signs of tampering. Dr. Hassan? Vexthor's voice interrupted her thoughts. Your vital signs indicate elevated stress levels. Perhaps you should retire to your quarters for a rest period? Before Naira could respond, the station's lighting shifted to emergency red. The corridor's atmospheric barriers, normally invisible, suddenly materialized as solid shields, sectioning off the station. Attention all personnel, the station's AI spoke in all known languages simultaneously. Unauthorized access detected in multiple critical systems. Security protocols dash. The announcement cut off with a harsh burst of static. Well, a new voice purred through the comm system. How quickly civilization's masks fall away. Naira pressed herself against a wall as heavy footsteps approached. Through the transparent barrier, she watched as a group of figures in sleek combat suits marched past, leading a line of her alien colleagues at weapon point. For too long, the voice continued, the Galactic Council has insisted on sharing advanced biological research with primitive species. Today, we demonstrate the folly of such misguided generosity. The speaker revealed himself, a tall, elegantly proportioned being whose species Naira recognized from her research. A sovereign, one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Behind him, a familiar face, or rather, crystalline form, efficiently disabled security systems. Zixri? Naira whispered, recognizing the station's safety officer. All those careful protocols, all that concerned monitoring of her vulnerable human systems, had it all been reconnaissance? Ah, Dr. Vexthor, the sovereign said, addressing her research overseer. Your work on cross-species compatibility has been concerning to those of us who understand the natural order. Vexthor's sensory appendages were fully retracted, a sign of extreme distress. Who are you? We are the Purity Collective, the sovereign gestured, and his soldiers herded more station staff into the main laboratory. The guardians of proper evolutionary progression. And you have been supporting dangerous accelerationism. Naira's mind raced. The barriers were designed to contain biological threats, not repel attackers. The station's regular security forces were probably already neutralized. And her alien colleagues, she watched as the station's brilliant, advanced, sophisticated staff huddled together, utterly paralyzed by the sudden violence. Their civilizations had evolved past physical conflict centuries or millennia ago. They had no context for this. Search the remaining sections, the sovereign ordered. Find any stragglers. Naira looked around frantically. The barrier beside her controlled the lab's specimen containment units. If she could just reach the override. Sir. Zixri's voice. Human biosigns detected in Section C. Ah yes, the pet researcher. The sovereign sounded amused. Bring it in. Carefully, of course. We wouldn't want to damage such a fragile creature. Naira's hand closed around the hidden data chip containing her true research. 3 months of careful observation, documenting not just human limitations, but human capabilities. 3 months of being underestimated, of letting them think her fragile. As footsteps approached her position, she allowed herself a grim smile. They were about to learn what Dr. Thalnine had begun to suspect, that sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was a human protecting something they cared about. And Naira cared very much about her research. 2 members of the Purity Collective found Naira quickly. They weren't expecting resistance from a primitive human. Their first mistake was approaching with weapons lowered. Their second was assuming her environmental suit was a limitation rather than a tool. Move carefully, one guard muttered to the other. These humans are fragile. Their bones break under minimal pressure. Naira let them escort her into the main laboratory, cataloging details with desperate clarity, 8 armed terrorists, 2 guarding the doors, the Sovereign and Zixri at the main control station, and her alien colleagues pressing themselves against the walls, their advanced minds struggling to process such primitive violence. The human researcher, Naira Hassan, the Sovereign examined her with elegant disdain. "We've reviewed your work. Quite impressive, for your level of development." "Thank you," Naira replied evenly. "I do try to overcome my primitive limitations." A ripple of amusement went through the terrorists. The Sovereign smiled indulgently. "You see," he addressed the room, "this is exactly the problem. When lesser species are given access to advanced research, they begin to forget their proper place." "Proper place?" Naira's voice was quiet. "In the natural order. Everything progressing at its correct pace." The Sovereign gestured at the laboratory specimens. "These breakthroughs you're pursuing, they should be discovered by your species in, another few thousand years. After you've properly matured. And I suppose the Purity Collective gets to decide what's proper?" His smile turned cold. "We are merely nature's instruments." He turned to Zixri. "Begin the purge sequence. All specimens, all research data. Let this station be an example." "No." Dr. Vexthor finally found his voice. "You can't. These specimens could save millions of lives across multiple species." "Precisely the problem." The Sovereign signaled, and one of his soldiers casually smashed a sample container. "Some knowledge is too dangerous for lesser minds." Naira watched as years of research, countless potential breakthroughs, shattered on the floor. Her specimens, her work, humanity's chance at treating dozens of devastating diseases. "Oh," the Sovereign added, almost as an afterthought, and set the station's core to overload. "We want this to be a proper cautionary tale." "You're making a mistake," Naira said, her voice still eerily calm. The Sovereign actually laughed. "And what would a primitive human know about evolution or proper development?" "Not about evolution," Naira interrupted. "About humans specifically. About what Vexthor got wrong in his analysis." Something in her tone made the Sovereign pause. "Oh? Do enlighten us." He thought our emotional instability was a weakness. Naira's eyes tracked Zixri moving toward the specimen storage area. "That our constant hormonal fluctuations made us inferior." Obviously, the Sovereign agreed. Advanced species achieve perfect emotional equilibrium. "But you see," Naira continued, timing her words carefully, "those emotions serve a purpose. Take anger, for instance. In humans, it triggers a very specific physiological response: increased strength, heightened reflexes, reduced pain sensitivity." "Fascinating," the Sovereign deadpanned. "But ultimately a real dash. We call it hysterical strength," Naira talked over him. "Mothers lifting vehicles off trapped children. Survivors fighting off predators barehanded. The kind of strength that only comes," she tensed slightly, "when something we care about is threatened." The Sovereign frowned. "Zixri, begin the purge dash." "Fun fact about humans," Naira said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the room. "We're also really, really good at hiding things." Her hand moved. Something small and metallic arced through the air, drawn from a hidden pocket in her supposedly primitive environment suit. It hit the floor between the terrorists and rolled. "What dash?" the Sovereign began. The device burst with a flash of light and sound that sent every alien in the room reeling. But Naira was ready. She'd built the stunner herself, calibrated specifically for non-human sensory systems. As chaos erupted, she smiled grimly. Time to show them exactly what an emotionally unstable primitive could do. The flash stunner's effect was devastating to everyone except Naira. Their primitive visual system, with its limited spectrum, had another advantage, an evolutionary adaptation called the pupillary light reflex. Her eyes were protected while her opponent stumbled blind. 3 years of working in an environment suit had taught her exactly how to move in restricted conditions. The nearest guard went down before he realized the fragile human was a threat. His weapon, designed for precision rather than stopping power because advanced species never expected physical resistance, clattered across the floor. Through the chaos, Dr. Vexthor watched in frozen fascination as his quiet, professional colleague transformed into something from prehistoric nightmares. The human's movements were wrong, too fast, too precise, too violent for a primitive species. His scientific mind automatically began cataloging observations even as his survival instincts screamed at him to hide. Impossible. Zixri gasped through their damaged systems as Naira disabled another guard with brutal efficiency. Your species lacks the strength dash. Your research was incomplete, Naira growled, securing the specimen controls. Then she smiled, an expression that made everyone in the room take an instinctive step back. But thanks for reminding me why I installed manual overrides. The Sovereign, recovering his composure, leveled his weapon. Step away from the controls, primitive. Your emotional outburst is futile. Emotional outburst? Naira laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. Oh no, this is perfectly rational. She slammed her hand down on a hidden panel. Suddenly, every specimen container in the lab sealed itself in independent stasis fields, a modification she'd quietly made weeks ago after noticing the first signs of sabotage. You see, she continued, her voice terrifyingly calm, humans have this interesting trait. We can compartmentalize. Right now, part of my brain is absolutely furious. A terrorist tried to rush her. Naira swept his legs with practiced efficiency, another hobby she hadn't mentioned to her concerned alien colleagues, and used his own momentum to throw him into his companions. But another part, she tapped her temple, is ice-cold and calculating. The remaining terrorists backed away, their superior technology suddenly feeling inadequate against this display of primitive violence. Even their combat training, focused on precise, civilized warfare, seemed useless against Naira's raw, adaptive fighting style. Most importantly, she said, disarming another guard with brutal efficiency, I learned that you've all forgotten something crucial about survival. She used the captured weapon as a club, disabling its owner's suit systems. Sometimes civilization needs a little barbarism. The Sovereign's perfect composure finally shattered. He backed away, seeing in Naira's eyes something he thought long extinct in civilized species, the capacity for righteous violence in defense of what matters. What are you?" he whispered. Naira smiled again, and every alien in the room felt their species' ancient survival instinct scream in warning. I'm a human who's very, very invested in her research. She reached for him with an eerily steady hand. And you just threatened to destroy it. The Sovereign learned then what countless others throughout history had discovered, there is nothing more dangerous than a human protecting something they care about. The station's medical bay hummed with nervous energy as various species of security personnel tried very hard to look busy while staying as far as possible from Naira Hassan. She sat on an examination table, letting the medical AI treat a minor cut on her arm while updating her research notes on a data pad. Fascinating, muttered Dr. Vexthor from a carefully measured distance. Your vital signs have already returned to baseline, as if the entire incident never occurred. Naira glanced up. Oh yes, humans are pretty good at stress recovery. Adrenaline crash and all that. She frowned at her data pad. Though I really wish they hadn't damaged the environmental controls. Now I'll have to recalibrate all the growth chambers. The chief researcher's sensory appendages twitched in disbelief. You're concerned about your experiments? After everything that just happened? Of course. Her fingers flew across the data pad. Science doesn't stop for terrorists. Besides, she added with a slight smile, I have 3 years of research to validate before certain parties try to dismiss it as primitive methodology. Across the medical bay, a holographic display showed the Galactic Council's emergency session. Dr. Thal9 was addressing the assembled representatives, her energy form pulsing with unusual intensity. The incident at Research Station Helios requires immediate reevaluation of our protocols, she was saying. Not just regarding human capabilities, but our entire approach to emerging species. But the violence, protested one council member. The sheer primitive savagery was precisely calculated, Thal9 interrupted. Review the security footage. Every action was measured. Every response proportional. Even in what you call savagery, there was method. The footage played again, Naira's efficient takedown of the terrorists, her protection of vital research specimens, her precise use of their own technological assumptions against them. Most importantly, Thal9 continued, consider what she didn't do. No unnecessary casualties. No collateral damage. Even in what you consider an emotional outburst, she maintained complete control. Back in the medical bay, the station's new security chief, a crystalline being named Rax 55, approached with visible hesitation. Dr. Hassan, we need your statement about the incident. Just let me finish this calibration sequence, Naira replied without looking up. Oh, and you might want to check the maintenance logs. I have a feeling our friends had help from other stations. You were investigating them? Rax 55's crystalline form flickered with surprise. Someone had to, Naira finally set down her data pad, since everyone else was too busy worrying about my sleep schedule to notice the sabotage. An uncomfortable silence fell over the medical bay. The alien staff exchanged guilty looks, or their species equivalent thereof. In the council chamber, Dr. Vexthor was having the worst day of his career. Complete revision of all human capability assessments, he stammered to the assembled council. The incident reports indicate significant oversights in our previous analysis. The massive view screen showed security footage from the station. The council watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive subject demonstrated exactly why Earth was classified as a death world. Note, Vexthor continued, his scales shifting anxiously, the subject's ability to maintain precise cognitive function during extreme emotional states. Previous assumptions about human psychological limitations appear to have been drastically miscalculated. Miscalculated seems an inadequate term, observed Dr. Thal9, her energy form pulsing with what might have been amusement. Perhaps we should discuss your new classification recommendations. Vexthor swallowed hard. Yes, well, I propose a new category, controlled evolutionary divergence. Species that appear primitive by conventional metrics but possess specialized adaptations we may have overlooked. Back at the station, Naira was finally allowed to return to her laboratory. The damage had been minimal, thanks to her emergency protocols. Her specimens, safely secured in their stasis fields, waited for continued research. Dr. Hassan? Dr. Vexthor stood in the doorway, all 4 arms clutching a data pad. That is to say. Yes? Naira asked, already running diagnostics on her equipment. We owe you an apology. The words came out in a rush. We were so concerned with protecting you according to my guidelines that we failed to recognize, that is, you are clearly more capable than a primitive species should be? Naira suggested mildly. Vexthor's sensory appendages drooped. We were quite patronizing, weren't we? Just a bit. Naira checked a specimen reading, then turned to face him fully. But you know what humans are also really good at? Forgiveness. Especially when there's important work to be done. She gestured at her specimens. These plants aren't going to analyze themselves, and I could use some help from the station's chief researcher. Assuming you're willing to work with an emotionally unstable primitive? Vexthor's appendages perked up. Yes, of course. He paused. Though perhaps we should revise the safety protocols. They seem rather excessive now. Oh, thank God, Naira laughed. If I had to go through one more 20-minute sterilization sequence. And so, in a laboratory orbiting a distant world, a new chapter in interspecies cooperation began, one based not on patronizing protection, but on mutual respect. And if the station staff sometimes jumped when Naira moved too quickly, well, that was just evolution at work. 3 months after the Helios incident, as it was now known in Council records, junior researcher Lux 8 approached Research Station Helios with considerable trepidation. Their assignment to work with the station's xenobotanical team should have been exciting. Instead, their primary emotion was anxiety. The stories had spread across half the galaxy by now, how a primitive human researcher had single-handedly subdued a Purity Collective terror cell. How she had moved with terrifying efficiency and predatory grace. How she had somehow maintained complex cognitive functions while in a state of emotional extremis. The official report was classified, of course, but that hadn't stopped the rumors. Some said she had torn through advanced combat suits with her bare hands. Others claimed she had reprogrammed the station's security systems in the middle of combat. A few even whispered that the Council was considering revising humanity's technological access restrictions. Lux 8's orientation briefing had been unusual. Remember, their supervisor had said, no sudden movements, don't interrupt her sleep cycles, and whatever you do, don't threaten her specimens. They found Dr. Naira Hassan in Growth Chamber 2, carefully tending to a row of iridescent plants. She wore a standard environment suit, much less elaborate than the triple-sealed model shown in older station footage. She was humming something soft and melodic that made Lux 8's anxiety sensors tingle. Dr. Hassan? Naira turned, and Lux 8 instinctively activated their emergency propulsion system, backing up several units. But she was just smiling, a simple expression that somehow failed to trigger the warning responses they'd been told to expect. You must be Lux 8, she said warmly. Welcome to what we call the greenhouse. Would you like some tea? Tea? Lux 8's confusion overrode their fear momentarily. But I thought humans needed special nutrient preparations? Oh, that was the old protocol. Naira waved dismissively. We've made some adjustments since, well, you know. They did know. Everyone knew. That is, about the incident. Lux 8 began nervously. Naira was measuring leaves with delicate precision. Is it true that humans can really? They couldn't quite finish the question. Naira sat down her instruments and looked at Lux 8 with an expression they couldn't quite interpret. Then she smiled again, but different this time, somehow both warmer and sharper. You know, she said, reaching for what appeared to be a primitive water heating device, everyone needs a hobby. She began preparing 2 cups with practiced ease. Some people garden, she gestured at the beautiful specimens surrounding them, the fruits of meticulous research and care. And some people, she continued, offering Lux 8 a steaming cup, occasionally have to remind the galaxy why Earth is classified as a death world. Lux 8 took the cup with trembling appendages. Now then, Naira said, her smile returning to its previous warmth, let me show you what we're working on. I think you'll find our current research on cellular regeneration fascinating. As they followed her through the growth chamber, Lux 8 couldn't help but notice how the plants seemed to lean toward her as she passed, almost like they knew something the rest of the galaxy was just beginning to understand. In his private quarters, Dr. Vexthor was putting the finishing touches on his new paper, Redefining Primitive, a comprehensive analysis of adaptive advantages in seemingly limited species. His earlier work on human limitations had been quietly archived. The paper's conclusion read, in our pursuit of advanced civilizations, we have perhaps forgotten that evolution favors not the most refined, but the most adaptable. The incident at Research Station Helios serves as a crucial reminder that what we perceive as limitations may in fact be carefully honed advantages. The human capacity to maintain higher cognitive functions while experiencing extreme emotions, far from being a weakness, represents a remarkable evolutionary adaptation that we are only beginning to understand. He paused, then added, "It is recommended that future interactions with human researchers be conducted with this new understanding in mind. While they may not require the extensive protective protocols previously mandated, a healthy respect for their capabilities is strongly advised." In the Council archives, a new classification had been added to humanity's file: deceptively advanced, exercise extreme caution. Species demonstrates remarkable adaptive capabilities and should not be underestimated despite apparent technological or biological limitations. And in Research Station Helios, life went on. The triple-sealed environmental suits had been retired. The excessive safety protocols had been revised. The patronizing concern had been replaced with professional respect. But if visiting researchers sometimes noticed how the station staff kept a careful eye on Dr. Hassan's specimens, or how they never questioned her primitive needs for sleep and temperature control, or how they seemed to relax just a little bit when she smiled, well, that was just good science. After all, the best researchers know that sometimes the most significant discoveries come not from observing strengths, but from understanding what others mistake for weaknesses. Naira Hassan continued her work, advancing human knowledge while teaching her alien colleagues a valuable lesson: that true civilization isn't about evolving past your primitive roots, it's about knowing when to embrace them. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other research stations were quietly updating their protocols. Not to protect humans from themselves, but to protect themselves from underestimating humanity ever again.